Today on the Idiot's Guide, we're talking about, man, I love fireworks. The series, of course, that is our MILF series. We're actually going to wrap it up today with our one final episode of this series. Really, the important part is not the love that we have for fireworks or freedom or America or whatever you want to call it. It's are we taking care of our veterans? I think, unpacking some of the good, the bad, and the ugly about our veteran healthcare system. And in California, surfers are finding themselves up a wave without a surfboard because some aggressive otters are stealing them. I'm your host, Adam Richardson, aka the Profit Hacker, and I'm joined by the man in charge, Mr. Joe Haslam. Welcome to the Idiot's Guide. All right, everybody. Well, welcome to the Idiot's Guide. We are, like I said, we're unpacking some of this stuff. We really want to get down to the nitty gritty about some of the things going on with our veteran healthcare system. Some of the, really the good stuff, hopefully, and some of the bad stuff too. I don't think we need to shy away from kind of this issue where you can kind of see. I picture the VA healthcare system, and I hope that they take offense to this because it's true. It's like an iceberg. You see like all the pretty shiny things on the top of the iceberg, floating above the water. You're like, ooh, that's gorgeous. Where this mountain of problems are underneath it. And don't get me wrong, like I would not want to be a person who's, spearheading any sort of help to try to get this to move forward, because you're literally trying to move an iceberg. It's really, really difficult, and it continues to grow. It is a monster that just never stops. And so there's always attempts at different programs, different solutions that are presented, and we're going to cover some of those things today in throughout this episode. But the biggest thing I think I want to keep an open mind about is this isn't something for our listeners or anybody who comes across this to say, man, we're going to go pick a fight with the VA. We're going to go, we're going to, I don't know. Guys, it's just the knowledge about, this information and being able to have that information to have a better mindset and keeping an open mind about what may have to come in the future for supporting our veterans.
And I think a lot of it is coming from someone who is not a veteran, who has not done any military service. We don't understand. We don't see the inner workings of the VA, how the healthcare system works for veterans. And so this is an opportunity to get that out there. Adam has been through the VA for a lot of years and knows a lot as he is a veteran, he knows how it works for veterans trying to get healthcare for themselves, for their family, that we as civilians just don't see. And so being able to get that perspective, I think, is so vital to understand, one, like Adam said, the good, seeing what is being done right, as well as what are the things that aren't being done right, and how we as non-military personnel can help, and what we can do to support our protectors in the military.
I think that there's this maybe a misconception about what we can do with this, or what we can do with the system of this, where it's kind of like, hey, let's throw money at it, let's wad up some more bills and toss it their direction, and hopefully they could do something with it. And we kind of see a systemic problem with it organizationally. But I want to say that that doesn't say don't throw the money at it, because year after year that continues to grow, and the reason why is because we're seeing a generational shift in veterans. So where I'm part of an organization called Disabled American Veterans. That organization, most of the group that is there is probably I would say 85% of them, as far as our state that we're in right here, are over the age of 70. There's a handful of us that are under the age. I'm not 70, so not even close, thank goodness. But I'm a rare case. Like most of the people, there's not very many that are younger than I am, and there's not very that we're serving into that situation. But the problem is the veterans that are my age are now starting to see the effects of what military service has done to them and done to their bodies, and now they're kind of going like, maybe I should look into this. Maybe I should see if like I'm spending an awful lot on medical bills, because I've had insurance my whole life, of course, like we say we're supposed to do as much as possible, but maybe a veteran doesn't use the VA. That's especially my age or younger, they don't even consider the VA hospital as an option. That's where the old guys go. And, that's where they get there. That's where you get put into a home and you're just kind of the end of your life sort of scenarios right there. But they don't realize how much the VA actually does. And just for our listeners, the VA, it stands for Veterans Affairs or Department of Veterans Affairs. And then there is the other one, which is the VA hospital or medical services. There's lots of different things that are attached to the VA. Their budget over the last year was about $303.2 billion. Largest discretionary budget in its history, $134.7 billion, and about $22.5 billion higher than fiscal year 2022. So those numbers are huge. They're massive, and they can kind of become intimidating where we go like, well, where's all that money going? That's a good question. Yeah. Probably one of the biggest chunks that you're going to see is VA disability and the awareness of VA disability. So I mentioned that I am a disabled American veteran. I'm representative in that organization here in our state, and I'm actually a commander for a chapter of the Disabled American Veterans. And so it's an honor to be able to serve amongst them. What our goal is to do exactly what we're doing today. It's bring awareness to everyone, to our society, the need, the impact, the support that's necessary for veterans that are, longtime veterans that are, reaching their retirement ages, to veterans who are transitioning to civilian life, and everything in between that. The organization has to look at it all. But like I said, there's this growing wave of veterans that are now my age and younger that exceed the veterans that are the older generations. But I like I said, I don't want the budget to be something that becomes intimidating or anything like that. I think one of the things that might come in handy right here is Joe's prepared a wonderful statement from his friend, Mr. George Washington.
Good old GW.
Good old G-dubs. And, I think that it's pertinent to kind of put this right here because we just talked about a cost of the organization as a whole. So,
yeah. And just to throw in there are a lot of people who don't like spending money. And I get it. I'm an accountant. I'm the heaviest group of penny pinchers there are in the world. But there are a lot of people who are anti-tax. And to some degree, yeah, that's good, being anti-tax. But recognizing that taxes are an important part of being able to keep our nation going. And this is from George Washington. So again, this is his farewell address. I found this for those of you who listened to last week's podcast. I found this in preparation for that, and I am loving this address because George Washington gave so much advice as the truest patriot there is to outline how we should function today. And so this is what he said in regards to He's talking about public credit, which is, being able to get debt to pay for needed services, etc. And he says, avoiding likewise the accumulation of debt, not only by shunning occasions of expense, but by vigorous exertions in time of peace to discharge the debts which unavoidable wars may have occasioned, not ungenerously throwing upon posterity the burden which we ourselves ought to bear. The execution of these maxims belongs to your representatives, but it is necessary that public opinion should cooperate. To facilitate to them the performance of their duty, it is essential that you should practically bear in mind that towards the payment of debts, there must be revenue. That to have revenue, there must be taxes. That no taxes can be devised which are not more or less inconvenient and unpleasant. That the intrinsic embarrassment inseparable from the selection of the proper objects, which is always a choice of difficulties, ought to be a decisive motive for a candid construction of the conduct of the government in making it, and for a spirit of acquiescence in the measures for obtaining revenue which the public exigencies may at any time dictate.
I'm fairly certain that there's about $200 worth of $10 words in that one paragraph right there.
Yeah, George Washington, he really went into a lot of details on this. And so to kind of break this down, I want to break this down a little bit because this is really important to think about it. That during times of war, during times of high need, we need to get debt. That is inevitable. But when we are in peacetime, that debt needs to be paid down. Mm-hmm. And the only way and the best way to pay that down is by taxes. And he advocates here for essentially high taxes until that debt is paid down for the very purpose of not passing it on to the next generation. Because that burden to the next generation is what we're seeing today of having to pay for all those things in the past and not having the revenues for it. Going on, he does admit that taxes are inconvenient and unpleasant. I don't think anyone can disagree with George Washington there. And I think the more important thing here is the intrinsic embarrassment, inseparable from the selection of the proper objects, the proper purposes for where that money goes, ought to be a decisive motive. So, very pointed look for the candid construction of the conduct of the government in making it. This should be the utmost importance of government in looking at how to spend the tax revenue and reducing it. And then going into this last part, and for a spirit of acquiescence in the measures for obtaining revenue, which the public exigencies may at time dictate. Okay, those are some of the really big words in there. And so acquiescence is the reluctant acceptance of something.
I thought that was a horse ranch.
Without protest.
Okay.
Without protest, I think is the biggest one here. And so we as the public and the government in general should have a spirit of acceptance without protest.
I like that the word is reluctant acceptance because it's almost like, okay.
Yeah. In the measures for obtaining revenue, so how we obtain revenue, we should reluctantly accept without protest that it has to be done, which the public exigencies, now that's another big word, an urgent need or demand, which the public urgent needs or demands may at any time dictate.
Okay.
And so essentially what George Washington, the founder of our nation, gave to us as advice as he was leaving office was that taxes are necessary. And taxes are necessary to provide for the urgent need for those measures to keep the government functioning. And part of that is the military.
Yes.
Paying for these veterans, that have put their lives on the line to protect us. And he is talking specifically about the wars
Yeah.
that may have happened on occasion.
You know, there's a part of that it's speaking about unavoidable. And that's true. There are conflicts that are unavoidable. However, over the history of our country, but even more recently, as we're still trying to figure out some of these, goals that the organization, the VA, has. There's an organization. It's called Concerned Veterans for America. If you want to check them out, they put out Policy Priorities 2023, and this is directly from them. CV, the number 4A.org, CV4A.org. And this is their policies for 2023. And this is just these guys, they call themselves CVA, and it's grassroots army. These are basically individuals who advocate very loudly and very much as much as possible in all directions, even saying that they'll incentivize programs to be able to get them to move forward and make progress, which is good. A lot of times these guys, you don't want to use the word bribe, but unfortunately they're motivated by some level of negotiation in it. It's not just say, hey, we're going to ask for more money. You're like, why? What are you going to do for me? Sort of a thing. And it functions a little bit like organized crime. Anyway, but one of the things that I liked about what, that statement in the farewell address is unavoidable. And there's a situation here that is part of the priorities this year in the CVA, and it is avoidable versus unavoidable. And so they're saying that rebalance constitutional war powers, saying that basically neglected its Article 1 duty to authorize and oversee military action, skewing the balance of war powers and increasing the risk of the U.S. entering unwise conflicts. It's saying that basically we're sending our troops into places that don't necessarily require our troops, and as a result are producing more cost on the veteran side. Now, I'm not saying don't go help the world. Please don't misunderstand me in that. But what it's saying is that, is this absolutely necessary, or is there an underlying risk or an underlying agenda that is actually motivating this conflict moving forward the way that it is? And as a result, you're impacting thousands of lives. Let me just give you an example. In the news today, and this is an example. I don't want to say it's avoidable or unavoidable. I just want this is one of those things that I would put the question to, is today in the news, our president activated 3,000 reservists to go and basically stay at the ready in Europe because of the war in Ukraine in response to that. That doesn't mean that those troops are anything other than the fact that we're probably just flexing a little bit more over there, saying, hey, like when we actually do a movement of war, you're talking 100,000 troops move in and nobody has a chance anymore. We're done. We finish it. But in this case, this is just saying, hey, we need to put some more of these assets in a more strategic location so that you don't mess around anymore. We need to finish this up. And like I said, you can ask the question, is that unavoidable? Is it avoidable? I don't know. And that's something that I'll put to you, not to me. I'm not going to give you my opinion. But what it is these policies from the CVA, what they're trying to do is try to better the outcomes of different situations that are happening, that holding the administrations accountable for the rules and regulations that they've set forth years and years and years ago, and continue to neglect in certain ways, or bend, or not even acknowledge, and or that they'll say they're using, but the reality is they're manipulating it for their improvement. I'm gonna switch to probably another situation here, and basically this is a report from 2021. I believe actually it was released in 22, talking about 2021 and the challenges facing the Department of Veteran Affairs. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because not a lot of this stuff has really changed. It's basically kind of been the same. It has always been this way. And this is just kind of saying, well, hey, we're looking at the costs of this and whatnot. I could point you to the fact of, if you wanted to look this stuff up, this is AmericanProgress.org, and you can find this article about the challenge facing the Department of Veterans Affairs. Number one, addressing the ballooning VA budget. Number two, expanding veterans' access to disability benefits. Number three, reducing the veteran suicide rate. Number four, slowing the privatization of veterans' health care. Number five, prioritizing the women and LGBTQ people who have and still serve in the military. Number six, rebuilding the department's infrastructure and staffing. Number seven, helping veterans transition into civil society. Every single one of those, if you were to imagine this only because of my experience in the VA, every single one of those is a bonfire. Okay. Or even better, a dumpster fire. Only because of the fact that they all present extreme challenges that are nearly impossible to overcome. So it's not a solution where we go, well, we just cut it. Nope. You cut it and everything shifts to the private sector and it buries everything. Mm-hmm. And so you're talking, numbers from 2006 fiscal year, it was $7.9 million or 7.9 million veterans, to 2022, 9.2 million veterans. So we have a big jump. That's a really decent jump in the amount of veterans using VA care. And it's only going to grow because, like I said, there is a tidal wave of our age that are just barely entering into that scenario. And if we're talking the conflicts that we were facing in Iraq and Afghanistan are just recently closing, and now we're flirting with the idea of another conflict, then what? We're just continuing to perpetuate this wave and make it a tsunami of more veterans coming home and not knowing what to do, and a system that can't handle it, and a system that isn't even staffed to handle what it has as far as the veterans that they need to serve. So, but before I bury it in all of its problems, let me give you a positive spin on this. This last year, actually, this was, I believe it was August 10th, 2022, they passed what's called the PACT Act. And the PACT Act is literally the largest healthcare and benefit expansion in VA history. What it is the full name of it, I didn't even know this, but it's the Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson honoring our promise to address comprehensive toxins, or PACT Acts. Promise to address comprehensive toxins. What it is, and I hear this a lot because I'm in the DAV, they talk about something called Agent Orange. And the pesticides that they would spray over the jungles to keep the bug population down, the different chemicals that they would drop over different areas of the country, including foreign governments doing this in Vietnam. And this goes all the way back to Korean War. And then let's fast forward to what they use the word burn pit. Burn pits are a normal behavior. I was actually field sanitation certified, and so I never had to actually work the burn pit, but I was near a burn pit almost 90% of my deployment. That's, and that alone, one of the things that the PACT Act did that's different than other situations or other acts that have gone through Congress was that, so this expands and extends eligibility for VA healthcare for veterans with toxic exposures and veterans of the Vietnam, Gulf War, and post 9/11 eras. Adds 20 plus more presumptive conditions to burn pits, Agent Orange, and other toxic exposures. So if you were in an island in, during these eras, and you were activated under the federal government to be able to do something, not necessarily in wartime, but because you were activated and you have those orders that showed you were in an area, and they burned trash, they burned their garbage, the toxins released in that qualify you under this PACT Act. Now, one of the things that's important is it says presumptive exposure. So I know this because I talked to our service officers, and those service officers do VA claims day after day, hundreds of them, droves of veterans. This is that in and of itself is an epidemic of not enough people to help the veterans that need help, even to try to submit the applications. And side note, on the VA side, I don't want to speak negatively against them, but very often they try very, very much to shift that away from their responsibility so that this person gets lost in the application process, makes it a lot more arduous than it necessarily has to be. And then that veteran just quits. And sometimes that probably leads to suicide. That's the shame that I don't like to see, is that somebody is looking and asking, and there's this intentional complacency from the VA to make it difficult for them to be approved for benefits. That's a shame. And I don't say that, but like with this situation, the PACT Act, the positive on this is this isn't the VA, this is Congress. So this is the government. Woohoo, kudos to government. They passed the PACT Act. Presumptive means that anything that you're dealing with this is my only $10 word that I have. So I'm gonna linger on it for a minute here.
There you go.
What presumption means is anything, if you can show that you were in an area, if you can show that, hey, during this date and this date, you were in country, in Vietnam or in Korea or in Iraq or in Afghanistan or any area of conflict or anything that you were activated that shows within the range of this, and there is a registry you can sign up for, just search PACT Act, it's va.gov. And you can sign up on the registry, and it will do the search for you and let you know, hey, you're under the PACT Act, you're protected. What it says is anything underneath those activations or those deployments is automatically approved. And the list is massive. I mean, high blood pressure is on the list. So, but you can't come in and say, I'm claiming PACT Act, because PACT Act is a government act. It's not a condition. So, you're like, I have a case of the PACT, it's not. So it initiates some of that process to become, or to discover what might be going on. Some of the conditions that you've maybe faced your whole life and didn't realize the connection to the service, that you're qualified to benefit off of, some level of care for the remainder of your life because of this. Maybe you have a family member that passed away because of this. They served in the military. Guess what? That's still presumptive. There's still qualifications that you can receive, even if that person has passed away. So this is a huge, huge win for veterans with the government. This is pushing the VA and forcing their hand to care, because they're not allowed to. It's basically discrimination at this point if they don't do something about this. So that's a good win.
Now, I do want to step in. This is an Adam heavy podcast because he's been there. I mean, I don't have a lot to add here because, again, I'm on the outside. This is great education for anyone who has never been in the military. Now, my grandfathers were both veterans, but beyond that, there's really not much in my family that are veterans. I always wanted to join the Air Force, but due to health reasons here and there, I never ended up joining the Air Force. But this is good information, and we have to remember what these veterans go through. Military personnel go through hell and back. It's I'm not going to ask Adam to describe what he's been through because that might push him over the edge today. But you've got to remember that these veterans are out there. They are in extreme conditions. They are put up against the worst situations that we can't even imagine. And then when they come home, they have a lot of conditions. Now, I'm getting older, and as part of getting older, I start to creak. But these veterans, that's normal aging process. These veterans have been through, they have put their bodies and minds through so much to keep us safe. And they don't have easy access to the medical needs that they have. And they have way more medical needs than we as regular people do. I don't know if saying regular people is right or not, but
are you regular people?
Non-military personnel, non-veterans, the amount of stress on the mind and body that veterans go through, we have to remember that there's no way that we can comprehend what they've been through unless we were there ourselves. And I've talked to enough veterans. I've worked with veterans through some programs that I do, alternative treatments that I do with veterans to help them through when traditional systems don't work. I hear the stories. Now, again, I've never been there, but I hear and through their eyes see what these veterans have gone through to keep us all safe, to keep other people in the world safe. Because remember, even George Washington said that we should be there for every other nation. We are there to protect the world. It's not always just about us. And these veterans go out to protect people. Mostly it's Americans that they're protecting, but they are called upon to protect other people in the world who are being persecuted, who are being threatened. And we have to remember that. They are putting themselves behind everyone else. And when they come home, they should have the easiest access to healthcare. And that's what this PACT Act is doing, is giving them more ready access. But the fact that it took an act of Congress to get them that access, while great, showing good progress, is really backwards to me on how that progress has gone.
I think that, I want to point out that, I appreciate the respect of not asking for stuff and realizing, you reminded me of this when you said, well, I'm getting older and things are starting to creak. And when I was overseas, they told us that with the vehicles that we brought over, those vehicles added about, I think it was about five years to every year or every month that they were there. So that's how much we ran those vehicles. But the human bodies were operating these vehicles. So if you think, like, even if I just did that math, I was overseas for 15 months in a combat zone. And so for 15 months, if I did that math for 5 years, Joe, do math real fast for me. How long is that?
15 months over 5 years.
Well, 15 months.
15 months in
15
5 years. That's 75.
75. Okay. So let's like that's a vehicle age. Okay. So you're talking 15 months. So I'm not going to say that I walk around like a 75-year-old. I'm never going to give myself that much credit, but when I came home from Iraq, in 2005, I was 23 years old, and I had high blood pressure and I had back issues. I was shopping online for a cane because I was limping. Luckily, I found a chiropractor that saved my back, but it was all independent. When I went to the VA, actually at that point in time when I came home, I didn't even know that I could use the VA. So I had private insurance, and my private insurance said, well, I can give you some really big heavy hitters, like some good drugs that'll make your back not hurt as much. So I was like, oh, neat, thanks. This is 2005 perpetuating the opioid epidemic.
Yeah.
So like I'm not going to bag on that, but once I got connected with the VA, I had already connected with a chiropractor about that, but the VA was the one when they tested my blood pressure and they were like, dude, your blood pressure's through the roof. Like, are you taking anything? And I was instantly put on blood pressure medicine at 23 years old. So I mean, doing the math, I was probably closer in wear and tear on my body to a 40-year-old at 23 years old than I was a 23-year-old that just went through a little tough situation. So, that I don't necessarily think that that's everyone's story, but the environments you're subjected to in a combat zone are far exceeding anything you can imagine here. I was trying to give a description to somebody the other day about temperatures because they were like, oh, it's so hot. And I was like, oh, you have no clue. It was my son and I, we were sitting in a dry sauna, and the temperature was raising in the dry sauna, and he was like, oh, I'm starting to sweat. I was like, it's not even the hottest I've ever been on. And I was joking with him about it, but like it starts climbing, and it climbs above 120, gets to about 128, and it really starts slowing down. It's like not moving. And my son is uncomfortable at this point. And I'm sitting here going like, nope, not there yet. I have a photograph of a thermometer overseas out just near the end of our deployment, 135 degrees on the thermometer. And they're like, no way. This Death Valley is the hottest temperature registered. I was like, registered? Sure. I took a picture of this. I can show you, it doesn't matter. Like we recorded temperatures when we're driving trucks down the road. Those trucks run at 217 degrees, is their operating temperature. So it's really, really hot. And you're on black asphalt in the middle of a hot desert. So when you get off of you pull over to the side of the road, that black asphalt temperature plus the air temperature outside, we had a registered temperature of about 180 degrees that we were standing in. That's not boiling. It's just standing around.
And these guys are not wearing t-shirts and shorts.
Nope. It's not tank top weather. No.
They are wearing full gear. Usually with how much weight was the
long sleeves with we were flak vests, but then they upgraded us to plated Kevlar vests. So with plated Kevlar vests and the ammunition that came with it, we were averaging somewhere in the ballpark of about 35 to 50 pounds, depending on what we were carrying. And that's just extra stuff that you are always wearing on you because you're in a combat zone. So, long pants. The best thing in the whole wide world was if you got to ride in a Humvee, because you didn't have to blouse your pants into your boots. You could leave them open, and that thing would just wind tunnel right through your pants. It was the best thing in the world. But anyway,
this is not something that the average person can comprehend. I'm going to tell you the closest I ever got. So I used to be an avid hiker. So I would, go to exotic places to hike, as well as a bicyclist. And so when I'm going on these hikes, usually they're, 10, 15 hour hikes, and you carry in and carry out. So you've got your entire day's food, you've got all of your water, plus an extra day's worth of everything just in case an emergency happens. And so you're wearing a pack. So I usually carried around 2 full gallons of water, plus a little bit of extra water for average drinking. So probably about 2.5 gallons of water plus food in a pack that I'm wearing on my shoulders. Mm-hmm. Now, usually when I'm doing these, depending on where you are, I like the areas that are kind of enclosed. So I'm wearing full jeans in order to protect my legs. I'm not doing short hikes, wearing shorts while hiking. But usually it's maybe a thin shirt, thin long sleeve shirt or a short sleeve shirt. That's the closest I've ever come to that. And when you're doing that, that pack weighs on you, mm-hmm. And after a 10-hour, 15-hour hike, you are drained for days afterward.
Well, and imagine being subjected to that day in and day out, what that does to the physical form of your body.
And that's exactly it. I mean, I know the impact of my very, very minor excursions. Now, these are extreme for the average person, but for military, I mean, this would be a day off for what
Yes.
you guys do. I know what the toll that it's taken on my body. That's why I don't do that stuff anymore, because it has impacted my body, my back, my hips, my knees, from all of that effort. And that was minor compared to what veterans have gone through and the stresses that they put on their body. Keep that in mind, what the average person does every day and the injuries that they have later on in life don't even come close, nowhere near a drop in the ocean of what these veterans have done and the medical needs that they have when they come home. I don't think we realize, the average person realizes just how much stress there is on a veteran's body and what that necessitates from a medical standpoint.
Well, I want to mention, like I said earlier, I'm part of the newer wave, and so that means that this isn't even discovered how big this is going to happen. What's happening next? I'm going to run through these, kind of give a brief, like, a little bit of a positive perspective on some of this stuff, so that I continue to be optimistic. Like I said, I don't want to dump on the VA, but guys, this is a serious problem, and it is something that's not the VA's responsibility to just fix it all, because that's not how it works. It's teamwork, it's efforts from all of our society to go, how do we tackle this? I mean, if I was to say, and maybe I'll address it in this sense, I'm going to cover mental health stuff in this, and part of that is, that's going to take our society stepping and circling around this, just like you need that help out there, so do we. And, if you were to say that I'm that your situation might be different than mine, we're still all dealing with some of these things, and we've all experienced different aggravations that have continued to make those challenges even worse. Let's say add in a combat experience, and there are some serious adjutants to it that can really, really make things substantially more difficult, especially if the care isn't there when you come back. I'll give you some personal stories here in a minute, but addressing the ballooning VA budget, I think that the fairer response is, I don't like the word ballooning VA budget, only for the sake that I think it's preparing for a tidal wave, so you can't balloon a budget big enough to handle what's coming. That's my thoughts on that, only because I've served with disabled American veterans for the last 12 years, and I know for a fact that there is nothing that they're not ready for it. I want to say they are not ready for it. It's not that there's nothing that they're not ready for. It's they are not ready for the next wave of this. They're still focusing on this older generation and still trying to make reparations for the things that they've completely neglected over years, and they should continue to face those things. But if they don't pay attention to the wave that's behind them while they're fixing these other problems, they're going to get destroyed. They're going to just smash it to smithereens. And I don't want to see the VA struggle beyond something that they can't do. But I do want them to at least take some accountability into it and say, hey, we really need to raise more awareness about this, and we need everyone's help to get this done. Because uniting our country into a United States is something that we do very, very well when it matters. Mm-hmm. So that would be the ask, is don't call it a ballooning budget. Call it, let's get ready for the next wave, because it's coming. Expanding veteran access to disability benefits. I think I read in one of the articles that I came across, it talked about the amount of benefits that are going through. Oh man, I gotta remember. So benefits, basically, there was, as of, okay, so they were saying that there's a massive backlog of these applications for pension and that kind of stuff. When you file for disability, you go through a bunch of tests and exams, and you're evaluated based on all sorts of different criteria. In this case, before 2020, actually, this was February 2020. It was about 200,000, I believe that roughly about there. As far as, no, I'm sorry, forgive me. It was less than that, but basically the math is by March 2021, it was 357,000 exams requests pending, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's nearly 3 times the amount pending from February 2020. So 3 times that amount in a matter of a year. And the problem is that's the beginning, guys. That's the beginning of this thing, and that's what I'm so worried about. Is we're looking at a budget going, how do we control this thing from expanding? I'm like, no. How do we make sure it can handle what's coming?
It needs to be expanded more.
Yep. So reducing veteran suicide rate. I think everyone, if you've heard any conversation about veteran suicide rate, it's 22 veterans a day. So much so that they're killing themselves in the parking lots of VA hospitals. Personally, I'm gonna get a little personal here, but I won't allude too much. I have clinical PTSD, and I actually have complex PTSD. But part of the problem that I struggle with is VA healthcare. The mental health side of VA is a long process. It's a line, and you get in line and you wait. And they say, well, we need to hurry and figure out how to get the system working better. That there's accountability programs doing evaluations to see like, hey, like this is really good. I actually learned something today, but so a little while back, my therapist went private. And when they go private, that means I lose a therapist because they're not under the VA. They're not paid by the VA. I can't afford a therapist, especially a doctor, and those are very expensive. And so it's more lucrative for them to go private in this circumstance, and they don't have to deal with the different situations within the VA. That being said, I lost that doctor. One of my last appointments with him, I was like, there's no reason for us to have a conversation. How you doing? What's your plan? You got a house up there kind of thing? You're like, whatever, just shooting the breeze, because there was no other reason why I should be on the phone with that guy at this point. I had video. So that's a good leap forward, is they're actually entering the 21st century. And they're using, they're using some of the technology and modernization. That's good. And it's also bad for the organization because they can't keep up with how fast it's moving. Yeah. But with veteran healthcare, with this for especially specifically mental health, my therapist put me on a list. He said, "Oh, I can put you on a list, and that's fine. And you just wait for the phone call, and they'll schedule you." So this was a few months ago, and when I got the phone call, it was okay. It was about 30 days later I got a phone call. And when I got the phone call, the earliest that they had an appointment available for me is the end of August. So 4.5 months waiting to see a therapist, whether or not, now that doesn't mean that this therapist is going to be the one that just hits it out of the park and we're going to have a good match. That's the next process is, sometimes the therapist isn't the best fit. I'm sure that happens in the civilian side, So if you're going and you're like, man, we are not jiving. I don't like your approach on this and you're picking on me too much. Or the other side of it is you have no idea how to work with, veterans. You look like Doogie Howser, like you're 12 years old. How in the world are you supposed to help me? Like that's a realistic scenario in almost 100% of the time. So you really you're dealing with some people who will tell you look like Doogie Howser. But that being said, 4 months is ridiculous. It's not a surprise that we have the suicide rate we have when the mental help that is supposed to be there in a heartbeat is minimal and second, it feels like an afterthought when it's that bad.
there is no realm in which it should take that long to see a therapist, ever. I mean, again, I come back to these men and women literally sacrificed their mental health to keep us safe. And yet we're going to say, wait 4 months, 6 months, a year to find someone to help you work through these issues. It boggles my mind that we allow that kind of scenario and complain about how much it costs.
Yep.
It never should. We should never, ever, ever see a news story about a veteran's suicide. Ever. We should be prioritizing them above all else because they're what keep us a nation. And yet we're willing to throw them to the curb.
To give you a little bit more of some of my personal experiences, when you go to the VA hospital, there's no I guess like an out, but you don't go to a doctor's office. There is a patient area if you schedule an appointment and you wait your 3 months until you see your doctor, your normal primary care provider, and that kind of stuff. That's all in dandy, and stay up on that because the system will actually drop you if you don't stay up on it. Even if you're disabled veteran, it will just, you'll get your benefits, but the system in the VA will drop you if you're inactive, and you have to reestablish everything. What I mean by reestablish, though, is that's the challenge, is if you have an emergency situation, or let's say you have the flu and you need to go see your doctor because that's normal, like you have a really nasty flu, the only option in the VA is the emergency room. So you go to the emergency room. Do you go to the emergency room for the flu when, in normal civilian life? No, you go to your primary care, not in the VA. You're not allowed to. So you can go to an outpatient clinic sometimes if those are nearby, but they're still considered an emergency room visit. The VA has done okay in the category of the fact of saying, if I have to go outside to an emergency room, let's say an emergency happens, they say nearest emergency room. That's a yes. They will take care of that, and eventually it'll all get handled. However, for just the normal average care, day-to-day checkup kind of stuff, or if you need to go get flu, stuff, it is an emergency room visit that you're doing at the VA hospital. And the thing that I've never liked about it is how inconvenient I am to everyone there. From the check-in staff to the check-in nurse to the doctor on staff. Because I have a flu bug, I am annoying. And that has been the treatment I've had for 15 years in the VA. And I don't know why. Because when I go to my own insurance and lean on that and go to a doctor there, they're really grateful to see me, And I know for a fact that the doctors in a VA hospital are very, very well paid. So there is absolutely no reason for them to treat people like that, especially veterans. No, that's just kind of my experience. I don't think that everyone's that way, but it is definitely something that I don't like. So what that does, though, is it motivates to the fact of one of the concerns they have, slowing the privatization of veteran healthcare. On one side, they want this umbrella to handle the VA to handle the healthcare for veterans. Well, veterans are going, well, that's dumb. I got 4 months before I see a therapist. I'm going to have to go find my own therapist. And then I'm going to have to pay out of pocket for however long until you guys pull your head out of your fifth point of contact.
Way to keep it clean.
That's the military clean right there.
Yeah.
And the military will get that. Yeah. But that's really what it is it's a response. The privatization of veteran healthcare isn't necessarily like organizations going, oh, we need to send this over to the private healthcare industry to be able to handle this. They do have something called VA Community Care, which is kind of an outsourced version. You can go to a regular doctor. There's partnerships all over the place to be able to do that. And that's really helpful. I've taken advantage of it. I'm currently taking advantage of it in a chiropractic sense. The VA's covering it. It's great. It's awesome. I love it. But it's always, if you have a need, they might have an alternative, but they're going to light that hoop on fire still. So it's still a hoop you have to jump through to get that need that, and most importantly, when it comes to mental health, it is a today. It is not 4 months. It is never that long. It is never a wait at all. And that's the problem that I run into, is that if you're waiting that long, if you're waiting for that process to kick in, then, it's finding and privatizing that. So then I think an alternative to that is, instead of privatizing, if a veteran has reported that they've had to go seek out that, then reimburse them for it.
Oh yeah.
Start a HSA, veteran HSA, and that fund pays for any need that exceeds this without jumping through the hoops of the VA in order for them to seek the care that they need so that they can get stuff taken care of.
Well, and I think the big thing here is when we're talking about funding VA benefits, funding all these kinds of things, one, remember, we need to do that.
Yep.
These guys are not just, volunteering their time to go do this. This is serious stuff. And we owe them that. There's no question about it. And even George Washington agrees. But
Amen.
The idea that they have to go through this system, and there's a lot of talk about abuse of the system and this and that and all these other things. It really doesn't happen all that much. Yeah, there's always abuse in the system. There's abuse in the system in private. You have a company. The company my wife used to work for actually just started. They have an external auditor coming in and just verifying that all the dependents that were on the insurance plan are actually dependents of the employees.
Mm-hmm.
And so it happens in the private world. It happens in the VA world. It's just a cost of doing business. And honestly, I would honestly trust a veteran more than I would trust the average person. Not all. I mean, they're the same as any other person, but they've put their lives on the line. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're not going to come in just to screw someone over to get some money. Okay. That's not what these guys are motivated to do. We need to realize that it's not a matter of we need to withhold this and reduce it and keep it as low cost as possible. When it comes to these healthcare benefits, we need to be as high cost as possible.
Yeah.
Because these guys need it. I say guys, that's a general term for men and women and everyone in the military. Guys is just an easier term for me, so I apologize if anyone's offended by that.
It's like the word dude.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's neutered. It's fine.
They need this. Why are we withholding it? Why are we saying it's not worth it to pay for their benefits?
Yeah.
Goodness.
So just to kind of wrap up, I'm going to give these last three only because we're really going to blow the time clock on this one. But number 5 is prioritizing the women and LGBTQ communities that serve in the military. I can attest, my wife is also a combat veteran, and over the last, 10 years, leaps and bounds different, way different. So much so that our last child that we had, she's now 7, just recently turned 7, was covered under VA healthcare because that was something that she's a veteran. She's also a female. They have different needs than dudes. Mm-hmm. I guess I just use dudes as a neuter term. So, so then a bunch of males. How about that? There we go. But Women's healthcare has really, really done strides. It needs a lot more, because I also know that the Department for Women's Healthcare is a sliver in a building, and that's all they typically get. But I love that their attention is on the specialty care for that, rather than it being like just get in line with the other men, and call it good. LGBTQ community. The biggest thing is that the impact for our service members and how the military has evolved, this goes back to different generations and different times and different, things that our presidents have put out over history of, different ways of communicating and or not communicating, not allowed to. And so a lot of that is to better care for that community in a more responsible way, acknowledging the fact that, for so many years has just been outright neglected. And so, that is something that they've really given a lot of attention to in both women's health, LGBTQ communities. Probably the last part, only because I don't qualify the last one as I think it misses the mark, but this one, rebuilding the department's infrastructure and staffing. Staffing is probably the most difficult thing. And 2020 didn't help. The pandemic did not help at all. What it actually did is probably force the VA to modernize in the way that it handles healthcare. They have telehealth a lot now. I see a therapist via video when I see them. So I've never been to an office physically other than years ago. But so up until recently, since the pandemic, I've only done video therapist appointments with them. That doesn't say that I'm not opposed to it, but it's something that just I'm recognizing that the VA is moving in that direction, which is good. They need to move faster because they're used to taking care of an organization that works on walkers and wheelchairs, like not the tech advance where I can get on my cell phone and have a doctor appointment on the other side of the country and be fine. That's a direction that they need to do, but staffing is the biggest concern. Staffing that is stealing, embezzling, is fraudulently moving this money. This budget is getting impacted by people who are not using the money fairly, is impacted by toxic work environments that these people can't work under. Personally, in our state here, the DAV is responsible for hiring a specific transportation coordination in our state to be able to transport veterans around, and they've gone through significant amount of turnover. We can't keep anybody in there. Currently, it's empty because nobody wants to work there. They can't. Anytime they go, the task is so big and so daunting, and the VA just assumes you already know what you're doing. Here is all of our workload as well as your own, because the VA, their transportation coordination at the VA is just like benefits and claims. It just kind of passes it downhill to the lesser, and they get inundated so much so that they just say, I'm done with this. I can't do this. I can't handle the workload. This is too hard. And that's a shame on the VA for doing something like that. But that's something that we're facing, is trying to fulfill these things that serve the veterans, and you can't even help that happen. So,
and to be clear, the people that are doing a lot of this, embezzling, the supply chain abuses, all these kinds of things are coming from administrators. These are not the veterans.
No, they're not. They're not. Most of them aren't even veterans.
They are taking advantage of the veterans because they see this as such a golden opportunity. And rather than, we don't see this in the private world. The VA needs to take a lesson a little bit from the private world and recognize that there are aspects that they need to put in as far as, checks and balances and other things. That's going to reduce the overall cost while increasing the overall cost being able to be spent on veterans.
Yeah. One of the last things is, I don't want to minimize this. It is helping veterans transition into civilian society. And I don't mean this as the VA is not trying to do something a good work in this area. It's just that, we talk about how the military trains you to be in the military, to act like a soldier or act like a Marine, act in a situation of violence. You respond forward. You don't run. And if that's how you are conditioned, you don't necessarily need to lose that characteristic, but you definitely need other characteristics to be civilized in our society. And that's the missing component, is that you're trained in a boot camp the other way, to be conditioned as a machine that works for the big machine, and then thrown back into a society and everyone calls you a monster because you only know that way of life. And that's the conversation that if you were, I don't ever want you to ask any listener, please don't ask if they think that they're a monster, because I use the word silence and violence. I call myself a monster because I recognize, I see it on people's faces in all the scenarios where I have lost it and I didn't mean to, and I feel that way. So the system is broken in that sense. And I think that they're wanting to do good to transition back into civilian society, but they don't know how.
And I've talked about this in previous podcasts. What we're talking about is what I call that soldier mode. I know it doesn't,
Right.
I'm using just the generic term soldier because it's hard to find another term. But when we're talking about soldier mode, we are training these veterans to be soldiers. We are changing their neural pathways. We are changing their entire neural makeup to respond as military personnel. And that is vital for their work. But then, as Adam said, there is no boot camp for those returning to put them back into a civilian mode.
Yeah.
And that's a missing piece. These veterans that come home, they are not monsters. They are not bad people. They are doing exactly what they are trained to do, which is be soldiers, confront aggressors. They are being soldiers, military personnel, Marines, airmen, whatever the proper term is, the generic is soldier. Adam laughs every time I do that. I try not to, but the
Service
idea,
members.
there you go. You are in soldier mode.
Yep.
Never, ever, any civilian listening to this, never get angry at a veteran who is responding in soldier mode. That is what they're trained to do. Do not look at them as a monster. They are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Veterans, you are not doing anything wrong. You are simply being put back into a civilian situation while still being a veteran. You are trained to be military. And I'm glad that they're working on something to help bring that secondary mode back in. We don't want to lose soldier mode. We just want to be able to train veterans to be able to switch back and forth between civilian mode and soldier mode.
But I want to say that I think that they're looking at it from a different angle, not necessarily going from soldier mode to, transitioning out of, to a little more refined mode of civility. Mm-hmm. But I think more of it has to do with, when I say the conversations to other veterans and they don't even know that they qualified for VA healthcare and they got out of the service 25 years ago. There are so many people that I talk to in the DAV that are in their 60s and 70s and have never used VA services, knowing full well that they absolutely do qualify. Well, then you also have other individuals that maybe in the system's been broken in certain ways that we're pursuing. Maybe there was an other than honorable discharge. Well, for any reason. I mean, you could write too many bouncing checks and they'll discharge you other than honorable. So there's different circumstances that you have to have, nuances of negotiations in that conversation. But one of the things I think that they're just not even really recognizing is this back to civility. And and retaining the experience and the training that you have, but applying a civilian or societal acceptable, norm to that, so that you can, if something happens, you can still respond the way best response you were trained to do, but still not be deemed a monster, because of other situations. So there's kind of a careful dance that you have to do in that situation. They look at it like, do they even know they get VA benefits? Well, we need to make sure that's our mission. I was like, well, most of them are trying to figure out why everyone hates them. That's what it is. And when we figured that part out, the rest of it comes with it, but they're doing it backwards. So you're doing it wrong. Hey guys, I'm going to shift topics. I want to kind of add a little bit of a lighter ending to this before we go to an hour and a half. This will be probably the longest episode ever. But
this is also a very serious one, which is
it's a really, really important topic. And honestly, I gave you the skim milk version of everything. And I want you guys to be able to get the full experience. What I would do is if there's something that I mentioned some websites, I mentioned some resources. There's a lot out there. And there's a lot of help out there. And if you aren't taking advantage of your VA benefits, or you don't even know that you qualify, if you served in the military or anything like that, reach out to disabled American veterans. If you served in the military, it doesn't matter. If you just served in the military, you qualify to be part of the DAV. VFW is the same. American Legion is the same. The only thing that I'm an advocate for DAV only because of the fact that we do 5 times the amount of everything else any of the organizations do combined. So please check out the DAV. We are there for you. That is our primary mission every single time we meet. We talk about reaching you.
And I'm just going to give a call out to all of the civilians out there that are listening to this. Reach out to your representatives. It's our responsibility as the public to direct our representatives in what they do. And so reach out. We're going to put some additional links on the podcast for ways that you can reach out, ways that you can communicate with your representatives to seek change for those veterans that have put their lives on the line for each of us. That's what we can do.
Yes.
That's what we as civilians can do to protect the veterans. And we need to do it.
Man, I don't even know what to do to transition into this. It's such a heavy topic, but I'm gonna just dive right in.
Oh, we're not getting the Adam transition here. Come on.
Well, I was thinking of different options, but I can't even think of a pun right now. That's what's so hard about this. Is like, it's just come wave after wave, and I don't have a surfboard because an otter stole it.
There you go. There.
So, guys, in Santa Cruz, California, around the coast, a big section of it, it's actually one otter that's doing this, and it's an otter that was raised partially in captivity, born in captivity, but for a particular reason. But born in captivity and then raised a little bit, released into the wild. And the otter's number is 841. And this one has reported 4 or 5 incidences where this otter has, sea otter has climbed up on the surfboards and started surfing, like scratching and trying to bite the surfer. Surfer's like, I'm bailing, I'm out. Like, forget this. I'm leaving my board. And the otter's walking, just surfing away with it, I'm like, this is the craziest thing in the whole wide world. Yeah. So if you're in Santa Cruz, there's actually Twitter and Instagram videos and pics of the otter snatching and riding the surfboards. But it's also a family affair. I found this out. No. So apparently the otter, born 5 years ago in captivity to an otter who was also known to approach people on kayaks. So, this territorial thing is hereditary. And it's just, it's a big fun thing. They like to pick on humans. And the officials, they've really done a good job. They've posted signs. And the signs say aggressive sea otter in this area.
All right.
Approach with caution. You're like, dude, that wave, man. I just got to get that surf on.
That sea otter's just out there to have some fun.
Come on, guys.
But he's being painted as such a negative. How is he going to go out and buy a surfboard? Honestly, this is the only way that he can go out and enjoy the surf.
Yeah, guys. Haven't you seen what's the one with Patrick Swayze? That's the movie that he's a surfer guy and all the surfer stuff. There's Blue Crush or whatever it is. That one's, I think Keanu Reeves is in one of those. They're all about like the surfer gangs and stuff like that. He's just trying to form a gang, guys. This is initiation.
We just need to, get this otter his own surfboard. That's what we need to do. And once he has his own surfboard, I'm sure he will leave everyone else alone. And you will just see him out there surfing along the waves, just enjoying
catching a swell,
life.
bro. Gnarly.
I can just imagine seeing this sea otter jumping up on the board and hanging five.
Oh, man.
Oh, I couldn't even finish that.
So officials say, they're actually not sure why. They have no clue. They're kind of guessing at this point. So the otter could be getting fed by humans. So that's a chance that it's been fed so many times on the beach that it just thinks that everything is his.
Yeah.
Or some kind of hormonal surge, like maybe that's a really beautiful surfboard and it's just like, oh, hubba hubba, whatever, I don't know how you would take a liking to to a surfboard, but here's my advice, guys. When you're getting shaken down by a sea otter, it's better to walk the otter way than to face the aggressive alternative.
Oh, these are getting bad.
Come on, give me. I even wrote that one down. Hey guys, it's time to say goodbye. I'm sorry. I'm gonna cut it before I try to beat that horse that's very dead. But before we go, we have one final request. We encourage you to go out into the world and spread a little kindness and laughter. Let's make this world a better place, one idiotic act of kindness at a time. And remember, life's too short to take ourselves too seriously. Embrace your inner idiot and keep learning, keep laughing, keep sharing the joy with those around you. And remember,
check your shoes.
Check your boots.